Hey guys, it's Graham. What's cracking? This is kind of my review of The Blizzard by Jeff Johns, Andrea Moody. I think it's Moody, sorry, and Rob Lee. It's Tales of the Unnamed from the Unnamed War by Ghost Machine. But it's one of those books that, in order for me to explain like where it fits, I've kind of got to give an overall view of the Ghost Machine comic run, which I've been meaning to do anyway. So let's jump into that. But before we get started, just remember that the crowdfunding thing for replacing my brother's car is still going on. Check the link below. I'd really like to see if we can get it up to 600 or 700 by the end of this week. So, with that being done, let me give you a slightly darker background there. Oh, look, Howling Wilderness comes out next week. Okay, so how did I get into Ghost Machine? Well, I've been collecting comics for close to a year now from my local comic book shop. I've been reading them for a lot longer than that, but for the first time, I've actually got a pull file. And I wanted to do kind of an experiment last fall, I want to say it was. Maybe it was earlier this year. I walked along and I just looked at the shelf and I said, the way that it was supposed to work at some point with bookstores is you'd walk in, you'd look at something, if it looked interesting, you'd buy it, and hopefully it was good. And for the most part, I'm going to the comic book shop to look for something specific. Like I'm hunting for something that I already know what it is. I'm just going there to buy it. But if I were to buy something off the rack and support the industry that way, but also find a good read that way, what would I be looking for? Well, with comics, obviously, like you want really, really great art, and then you hope that that leads to there also being a really, really great story. The art on this one looks freaking awesome. The title Ghost Machine, I had a YA manuscript called Ghost Machines like 10 or 15 years ago. So obviously, like that title jumped out at me. This is not at all related to it. But this particular issue, this comic was a sampler of titles coming out under the imprint Ghost Machine, which I think is owned by, Image Comics. I'm not one of those guys that knows a whole bunch of names in the industry. I've been following your boy Zach since 2017, but he knows all those names and stuff better than that. I thought, well, why don't I buy this book, not worry about like who's making it or any affiliations or any of that crap. Just like if it looks good, I'll buy it and read it. And I did, and there were a couple of pitches in it that seemed interesting, so I picked those up. And for the most part, I was satisfied. That's what kind of got me into this huge stack of comics that I have here now, including a couple of trade paperbacks. Ultimately, that brought me to Junkyard Joe, which this is a compilation of comics that came out in like 2021 or 2022. This made my best of year list for reading this year. The Junkyard Joe book was freaking awesome. And even though I wasn't initially interested in Geiger, um, because these books are all connected and the characters in them are connected, it became necessary to read Geiger in order to understand the things that were going on in the Unnamed War saga. I picked it up, I read it, I loved it, and now I'm completely committed. Um, Before I get into the Blizzard, let's just talk about this stuff right here. Okay, so Redcoat. Rook Exodus, this is probably my favorite single ongoing series. There are 4 issues out now, and next week issue 5 comes out. But even though this is a Ghost Machine title, it's not part of the Unnamed series. This happens on another planet. It's its own thing. Um, Redcoat issue 5 just dropped today. The main character here is a guy named Simon Pure. He was cursed to become immortal based on some goof up that happened in the late 1700s. And so his ongoing series is going to be a bit of a saga of his life. He popped in, I believe, at the end of Geiger. He got a shout out here at the end of The Blizzard. He's this guy who's hundreds of years old. This particular arc with these issues here have to do with him teaming up with a very young Albert Einstein and trying to stop a plot to destroy America. I think that he is ultimately unsuccessful, but that is largely because of the timeline of the Unnamed War. 25 years from now, there's a nuclear war. That's what results in Geiger walking across America. Like, this is a centuries long saga. Junkyard Joe started in Vietnam. Geiger ends up 25 years in the future. Redcoat's in the past. There are other books that haven't come out yet. There's one that I'm interested in called The First Ghost, based on hints that they've dropped. There's like a ghost living in the White House, and that's what that one is going to be about. I'm like, okay, cool. In addition to like the art being really cool, the storytelling and the characters being great, there are little drops of historical facts mingled in with all this stuff going on that makes it just really come to life for me. You guys know that I love reading historical nonfiction, and it seems like a lot of what I have read overlaps with a lot of the stuff that Geoff Johns has read and decided to integrate into these books. The one thing that made me nervous about Redcoat was in a recent issue. They meet other figures throughout history. They run into Benedict Arnold. They talk about Patrick Henry. Obviously, Ben Franklin made an appearance. There was a slight subplot where they got to mention and talk about Johnny Appleseed. Like, all of this stuff is relevant and cooks into the story. What they were implying, though, was that George Washington was secretly a bad guy. There's a resolution to that in Redcoat number 5 that I was very, very pleased with. I was like, they're not going to go down some weird, like, subversive history route with this. It is just excellent. And then for the 5 Geiger editions, like, this trade paperback was, again, from a couple of years ago. I think they tried getting all these stories off the ground under an imprint called Mad Ghost, and then now it's under Ghost Machine. I think it's just a matter of like legalese. Like, we were an imprint under Image, but now we're like a creator-owned imprint. I don't know how all that crap works. I just know that they've published some of these characters before, and now they're continuing them. The nomenclature is a little bit different, but it's the same characters. It's the same continuity. So while this book, the Geiger book, establishes the character, these comics here are kind of the next arc of his journey. He's got this two-headed wolf named Barney that gets captured and injured as part of a trap to lure Geiger out of hiding and collect a bounty on him. They do a great job in this one, this 5-issue arc here, of kind of expanding things and showing that even though America has been just crippled by a nuclear war and they don't know who started it, there are still big power players. There are still structures and organizations that are working against each other. And the big reveal at the end of Geiger 5 is what's going on with the government. There was a bit of that hinted at it was a big part of the Geiger trade paperback. The plot revolved around somebody finding the wreckage of Air Force One, and in it they found the nuclear football. And the nuclear arsenal is still like active and everything. With the football, they can access it. And so whoever holds that holds the power to start the next wave of a nuclear war. All of that is, there are dire implications for all of that. So the story is incredibly strong. The setting is very, very compelling and easy to get lost in. And there's so many different layers that they can peel back to tell really great stories in it. I think Geiger and Redcoat, like, they're very, very powerful characters in their stories, and not just like in terms of their motivations and their strength of character, like the superpowers, the abilities that they have, but they're also like, you couldn't get them confused for one another. Their temperament, their disposition, their motivations are all very, very different. They're vibrant characters that if you were to strip away their settings and their sci-fi or fantasy abilities and still write them as the characters that they are, they would be who they were. The rest of the stuff is just really, really cool window dressing. So I'm loving this series, and especially as it all unfolds, like, I love seeing the hints and the callbacks to each other. I really, really hope that they get another series of Junkyard Joe running, because as much as I'm enjoying Redcoat, and I really, really have been surprised by how much I like Geiger, Junkyard Joe is probably my favorite story. They've got hardcovers of Junkyard Joe and Geiger. Well, there's a Junkyard Joe hardcover now. There's a Geiger hardcover. I don't know. I'm getting the timelines mixed up. I think the Junkyard Joe one comes out in November. There's a Geiger hardcover out now that's got another 80 pages of comics in it that I need to get and read. So when the Junkyard Joe one comes out, I'll buy that and the Geiger one for my library, and I'll probably send the paperbacks off to my nephews. I think they'll get a kick out of that. So now that we're 10 minutes in, let's talk about the Blizzard. There's a reason why I wanted to do this one as an actual video and not just a Graham in the car thing, because I would need to do it as a video to explain what it was I liked about this, and also like what I didn't like, because I do have some criticism of this one. Um, you can tell just looking at these and looking at this one, like they switched artists for this one, and the art in the Blizzard is probably its weakest point. It's not as sharp. It's not as like there are parts where you can look at it and be like, okay, like I get what's going on here. Other times, like it gets confusing. It gets messy. I get that it's trying to convey how your senses get muddied in a blizzard, but I think there are times when it overcommits to that bit. It leans really heavily on watercolors, and it lacks some of the signature visual elements, especially the crispness and the clarity of the other Ghost Machine books. The premise of this one is that there's a bus full of violent criminals headed towards a maximum security penitentiary in Colorado, but the bus crashes and during a blizzard, and there's a monster out there that uh, is issuing divine judgment against people that would otherwise have gotten away with certain things. There's a cool reveal at the end that explains like how this ties into other parts of the Unnamed War. That's why it's an unnamed book, but it's Tales of the Unnamed, so it's not an ongoing title. In that, I think this is just going to be a one-off thing, which is cool. Like this world and this timeline are both so expansive that you can fit a lot in here. And if you've got an idea that would just work well as a standalone, but you don't need to milk an entire ongoing series out of it, by all means, do it this way. Um, I would have just I got to the end and I just kept thinking like the colors were really monochromatic. They had like a really limited palette range, and it just seemed really sloppy compared to everything else. But other than that, the characters are strong. The story was compelling, and one thing that I found especially uh, intriguing about this is this year I've become more of a fan of like YouTube channels that do like lore deep dives and history explanations about lesser covered news stories from yesteryear. I didn't know that 1984 was the year that the Gary Plauché incident happened. If you're unfamiliar with that, down in Louisiana, Gary Plauché was a family man whose son was kidnapped by his karate instructor and like trafficked and exploited, we'll say. And this was after like they had opened their home to this man and they were good to him. They gave him charity and everything. Turns out like this guy was doing things to a lot of kids, and he did some naughties to Gary's son. And Gary ended up intercepting what was the dude's name, Jeff Doucette. And like news media were there as the police were bringing Jeff in. Like Gary was waiting at the airport or something, like by a payphone, and when Jeff walked by, like Gary griefed him on TV, like just pulled a gun out, one shot straight to the head, killed him on live television. And he ended up like not serving any time for it. Jury wouldn't convict, all that. Like it became a huge deal. The reason that that's relevant is the story features a character who does something very similar. And I noticed when they mention this, or when they depict this in the beginning, there's a character who gets arrested and he's on not death row, but like life sentence kind of thing, because he does the Gary Plauché shot. His son was killed by a local serial killer. While the elements of the story echo the whole Gary Plauché thing, it's not like a one for one, like, oh, he's exactly like him and the killer is exactly like him. Like the circumstances were similar, but the characters were very different. The whole point of it, though, was to ultimately set up this kind of exchange that pops up on the news later, where these anchors are talking about it, and like, well, is it right for people to do this? Is it wrong? Like they even give a shout out to the whole Gary Plauché thing. Like we've seen people do vigilante justice before. Is it right? Is it wrong? And the takeaway is this debate won't ever end because the value judgments that people make about it are going to be as varied as the people themselves. Like if you're a father and you are even able to like conceptualize somebody doing this to your kid, like chances are you'll come down on the side of Gary Plauché and be like, oh yeah, no, he did nothing wrong. He was father of the year, like the memes say. Other people are going to be hardliners for like, well, murder is always wrong, isn't it? So, what do you do? In the end, the man who kind of fills the Gary Plauché role in the story is one of a few convicts on the bus that goes off the road and gets stuck in the blizzard, and the monster is hunting the violent criminals. Um, Again, like his situation is not exactly like the Gary Plauché one, but you can tell that Geoff Johns was drawing from that to tell this story. But he made his character like his own character. It wasn't just like, oh, and then he got away with it because he was completely justified. Like, I'm not going to spoil it, but the man had his own mistake that he made, and unlike Gary Plauché, he felt that he bore some responsibility for what happened to his son. I won't say anything more than that. I gave this book 4 stars. It just came out a couple of weeks ago. In fact, it came out while I was on vacation. I timed it poorly when I pre-ordered it, and I ended up messaging my friend. It was like, "Hey, this thing's going to be on my doorstep for the next 3 days. Can you go throw it in my backyard?" And I came home and read it, and I liked the story for itself. I liked how it fit in with the rest of the unnamed stuff. Just like I said, compared to the expectations that I've had for these Ghost Machine books and their artwork, this one was a departure from that, which I think still worked for the aesthetic that it was trying to establish. But there were just so many moments where the artwork got really washed out, and it kind of destroyed the immersive quality of this reading for me. There's a fire and a snowstorm and that kind of thing. Nevertheless, still good, So obviously between good and great, still good and still a recommendation. And like overall, I'm happy to be excited for a series again, and for a couple of different series. Like understanding that these are all going on in the same timeline and that there's more to come. Like this is what's getting me back to the comic book shop every single Wednesday to buy the next whatever it is that's coming out. Again, here's the timeline for the unnamed series. First Ghost. I don't know anything about Widow X yet, or what the monster is, or the Northerner. They've just done Redcoat, Junkyard Joe, Geiger, and we're still waiting for details on the Unknown War. So that gets me excited because like there's more to come, and especially with this whole Tales of the Unnamed sub thing here. Like if Geoff Johns is gonna keep writing little one-off stories and then like hiring artists that are outside of the main lineup of artists for the other series, just said, hey, I've got this one-off. You want to handle this thing for me? Like I'm fine for that. I'm fine with that. If this is going to fill up an entire shelf of mine, then oh boy, I could think of worse fates. Anyway, that's my review, and be sure to check out Howling Wilderness on August 27th, and this Friday, August 23rd, the Super Generation drops. That's an anthology that I'm in. Very, very stoked for that. Can't wait. I'll get you guys a link as soon as it is live. Till next time, drive safe. See you out there.